My daughter-in-law called me a charity case at my own son's rehearsal dinner. Right in front of 60 people, wine glass in hand, laughing like she'd said something clever. "Don't worry. We'll make sure someone keeps an eye on him during the reception. You know how these situations can get awkward." She meant me. The retired janitor with the hearing aids and the 10-year-old Buick. The man her husband grew up calling Dad. What she didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I was worth $4.2 million, and I'd spent the last 4 months letting her believe otherwise. Let me back up. My name is Lawrence. I'm 63 years old. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and until about 6 years ago, I worked maintenance at the Tucson Unified School District for 27 years. That's the truth. What's also true is that my father, who I barely knew, died in 2018 and left me everything. A commercial real estate portfolio in Phoenix he'd built quietly over 4 decades. 3 strip malls, a self-storage facility, and a warehouse he leased to a logistics company. I never talked about it, not because I was ashamed, but because I'd spent my whole life being Lawrence the janitor, and that suited me fine. The money sat in accounts managed by a financial advisor named Don. I drove my Buick, I wore my New Balance shoes. I kept my hearing aids in because I needed them, not because I was putting on any kind of show. My son, my only child, is 34. He works as a structural engineer in Scottsdale. Good job, good heart, everything I could have hoped for after his mother passed when he was 19. We've been close in the way that fathers and sons become close after loss. Not sentimental, not perfect, but real. He called me every Sunday. He drove down to Tucson for my birthday every year without being asked. When he told me he was engaged, I was genuinely happy. He'd met her through friends at a work event in Phoenix. She was a marketing director at a mid-sized tech company, 31 years old, polished in the way that certain people from certain backgrounds are polished, like they've been rehearsed. I told myself I was being unfair. First impressions, then came dinner. The 4 of us, my son, his fiancée, me, and my son's college friend who he'd brought along because I think he wanted a buffer, went to a restaurant in Scottsdale that I would not have chosen. $42 for a piece of salmon. I didn't say anything about that. I was there for my son. She spent the first 20 minutes talking about the wedding venue, the resort in Sedona. $40,000 minimum, she said with the casual ease of someone reading off a grocery list. Then she looked at me and pivoted without any transition whatsoever. "I hope you don't feel pressure to contribute financially," she said. "We know you're on a fixed income. We've already budgeted around that." A fixed income. I was 62 at the time, still technically working part-time consulting for a facilities management company. But she'd already filed me under a category, and that was that. My son looked at the tablecloth. He knew how to read me well enough to know I wasn't going to say anything right then. I smiled and said I appreciated her consideration. She moved on to talking about the centerpiece arrangements like the conversation had never happened. Over the following months, the pattern repeated itself in ways both small and not small at all. When they came to visit me in Tucson, she walked through my apartment with a look on her face I recognized immediately. It's the same look people get at estate sales when they're trying to seem polite while deciding if anything is worth picking up. She suggested twice that I might want to look into a more manageable living situation. She meant a retirement community. I was 62. At my son's birthday in February, she'd organized a dinner at her parents' house in Paradise Valley. Her father is a thoracic surgeon. Her mother sits on 3 non-profit boards. I arrived with a bottle of wine that cost $22 because it was the best one I knew from memory. And she received it the way you receive something from a child, with a big warm smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Her father shook my hand once, and then found reasons to be in other rooms. She told my son I would probably be more comfortable at a casual family gathering than at their country club events. She started having conversations with him about estate planning. His estate, his future. In ways that made it clear she thought there was nothing to plan for on my side. When my son mentioned offhandedly that I'd helped him with his down payment years ago, she looked genuinely puzzled, like she was recalculating something. The moment that made my decision was a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I was at their house in Scottsdale for a Sunday dinner. I'd arrived early and let myself in with the spare key my son gave me. They were upstairs. I heard her voice first. Not the words, just the tone. I should have made a noise, cleared my throat, anything. Instead, I stood in the kitchen and heard her say, clearly enough, "I love your dad, I do. But we need to think about this realistically. When things progress, and they will progress, we cannot be the ones responsible. There are facilities for this. My parents' financial planner said we should document now, before anything becomes complicated." "Nothing's progressing," my son said. "He's 62. He wears hearing aids. He lives alone, and he drives a car older than our relationship. I'm not being cruel. I'm being practical." I set the grocery bag I'd brought on the counter quietly and went back to my car. Sat there for about 5 minutes. Then I went back inside and knocked on the door. They were warm to me all evening. She made chicken masala. She asked about my old co-workers. My son watched me across the table the way he does when he's trying to figure out if I'm okay. I drove home to Tucson and called Don the next morning, not to move money, not to change anything, just to talk through what I was thinking. He listened. Then he said, "You know, this is your life and your call entirely. But whatever you decide, I'm here." What I decided was this. I needed to know who she really was when she had no reason to perform, not who she was when she thought a future inheritance might be watching. Who she was when she thought I had nothing left to offer except inconvenience. I didn't hire a Hollywood effects team. I didn't fake a stroke. I just stopped correcting any assumptions she made. I let my Buick stay the Buick. I let the apartment stay the apartment. I declined her suggestions for nicer clothes before family events by saying I was comfortable, thank you, and I started paying closer attention. It didn't take long. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Scottsdale, one of those modern American places with exposed brick and cocktails named after weather events. 60 guests, immediate family and close friends. I sat at a table near the back with my son's college roommate and his wife, who are both good people, and my son's old friend from high school, a woman named Paula, who I've known since she was 17. Paula is loud and funny, and she noticed things. I was talking to Paula's husband when I heard the laughter. The specific quality of laughter that happens when someone says something just slightly too far, and the people around them aren't sure whether to join in or redirect. I turned around. My daughter-in-law was talking to her college friends at the next table. She was looking in my direction, and she was saying, and these are the exact words, because Paula heard them too and repeated them to me verbatim afterward to make sure she hadn't misheard, "He's sweet, but you should see his apartment. We're already thinking about the next few years. We'll make sure someone keeps an eye on him during the reception." You know how these situations can get awkward. Her friends laughed. One of them glanced at me. I held my water glass and looked at the menu insert I'd already read twice. She didn't know I'd heard. She didn't come over to check. She ordered another cocktail. On the drive home that night, I made the call I'd been thinking about for weeks. I called my attorney, a woman in Phoenix who I'd used since my father's estate cleared probate. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "All right, Lawrence, let's do this properly." The wedding was 3 weeks later. Sedona. The resort was beautiful in the way that expensive things in Arizona are beautiful. Red rock formations, pine trees, a pool that caught the sunset light. I wore a suit I'd owned for 6 years and had dry cleaned for the occasion. I drove my Buick up on a Friday afternoon, checked into the room my son had booked for me, and sat on the balcony watching the light change on the rocks. My son called to check on me. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. I didn't tell him anything. I wasn't sure yet how far this would go. The ceremony was in an outdoor pavilion. My son stood at the front in his charcoal suit and looked the way fathers hope their sons will look. Steady, grateful, slightly overwhelmed by the good of it. I sat in the second row because the first was reserved for her parents. Her father had a fresh haircut. Her mother wore a dress that cost more than my first car. During the reception, her mother found me at the cocktail hour. She was pleasant. She meant well, I think, in the surface sense. She asked about my retirement, my routine, whether I'd considered moving closer to the kids. That word, kids, like I was a neighbor they were managing. I told her I liked Tucson. She said, of course, it's very affordable down there, and moved on to find someone else to pleasant with. My daughter-in-law circulated through the room with the focused energy of someone executing a project. She was good at this, I'll give her that. Smile. Touch arm, move on. Smile. Touch arm, move on. Smile. Touch arm, move on. She came to me once during the cocktail hour, squeezed my shoulder, said I'm so glad you're here, and was gone before I could respond. Dinner was served. I sat at table 9. Not the back of the room exactly, but not near the head table either. The other people at my table were perfectly nice. The conversation was fine. The chicken was dry. I had 2 glasses of wine. Then her maid of honor gave a toast, which was warm and funny, and went on 5 minutes too long. Then her father gave a toast, which was about excellence and legacy, and his daughter's exceptional judgment. Then her mother cried. Then the DJ started. My son danced with his new wife to a song I didn't know. I watched from my table. He was happy. That part was not performance, not complicated. He was genuinely, visibly happy, and looking at it made my chest hurt in the particular way it hurts when something is real, and you're not sure what's about to happen to it. Her younger sister found the microphone during a pause in the music. She was a little drunk. She started saying something about family values and new beginnings and what the couple represented. Then she said, and to our new family, especially Lawrence, who I've heard so much about. The way she said it, the slight pause before my name, the smile that was almost a wince. I'd heard so much about. I thought about what she had heard exactly, and from whom. Her mother leaned over to the woman beside her and said something I couldn't hear, but I watched the other woman glance at me and nod with that particular practiced sympathy that people use for the elderly and the inconvenient. I excused myself from the table. I found my son near the bar 30 minutes later, alone for the first time all night, loosening his tie. "Hey," he said. "You okay? You disappeared for a bit." "I went to make some phone calls." He studied me. He knows my face, the way children know their parents' faces, not consciously, but in the way that registers before the thinking starts. "What phone calls?" "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to just listen until I'm done." We found a quiet spot on a terrace off the side of the venue. The Sedona night was cool, the way high desert nights get even in summer. I could hear the music through the glass behind us. I told him everything. I told him about my father's estate, which I'd never fully explained, because it had come at a time when we were both still raw from his mother dying, and it hadn't felt like the right moment. And then the right moment never came, because money is strange and complicated, and I didn't want him to think I'd been hiding something deliberately. I told him the real numbers. I told him about the portfolio Don managed. I told him about my attorney. I told him what I'd heard at their house in Scottsdale, what she'd said at the rehearsal dinner, the things her mother had said tonight, the way I'd been filed under a category before anyone asked me a single question. He was quiet for a long time. "Dad," he finally said, "why didn't you just tell me?" "Tell you what? That your fiancé thought I was a burden? What would you have done?" He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "I needed to see it for myself," I said. "Not to punish anyone, not to ambush anybody. I needed to know what she actually thought, because that matters. That tells you something true about a person that dinner conversation doesn't." "And now?" "Now I'm telling you. What you do with it is yours." He went back inside. I stayed on the terrace for a while and finished my water. What happened next? I didn't engineer. That's the part that still surprises me. My son went back to the reception, and about 40 minutes later, during a slower stretch of music, he stood up with a glass and asked for everyone's attention. His wife looked up from the table with a pleased expression, assuming this was a spontaneous romantic gesture. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about his mother, briefly, and how much he wished she could have been there. He talked about the life he was grateful for. Then he said, "There's something I want to say about my dad." The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when someone shifts tone. "My whole life," he said, "my dad showed up. Every single time, without making it a production, without needing to be thanked for it. When my mom got sick, he worked doubles and he was still at every one of my games. When I got my engineering license, he drove 6 hours round trip just to take me to dinner. He doesn't talk about what he does for people, he just does it." He looked at me across the room. "I found out tonight that he's been carrying something for a long time, that he never mentioned because he didn't want it to change how people treated him. That's exactly the kind of person he is." His wife's pleasant expression had gone very still. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions sooner, and I want everyone here to know exactly who you are." He didn't reveal the money. That wasn't the point he was making. The point was different. And it landed the way the truth lands when it's delivered quietly in front of people who have been assuming the opposite. Her mother set down her fork. Her father cleared his throat and looked at the tablecloth. She sat with her hands folded in her lap for the rest of the evening. When the DJ started again, she danced. But the circulating and the arm-touching had stopped. The night ended. People filtered out. My son hugged me at the elevator and didn't say anything for a moment. I told him to go be with his wife. He nodded. He went. I drove back to Tucson the next morning. The conversation that needed to happen between my son and his wife was theirs to have. I didn't know what it would be. I hoped it would be honest, because my son deserved honesty. And so, in whatever way a person can deserve a hard thing, did she. In the months that followed, things moved slowly and then faster. She called me once, about 3 weeks after the wedding. She didn't open with pleasantries. She said, "I owe you an apology and I know sorry doesn't do much, but I am." I told her I heard her. She asked if we could have dinner when they came to Tucson. I said yes. That dinner was uncomfortable in the specific way that dinners are uncomfortable when two people are trying to figure out if they can trust each other. She asked me direct questions. I gave her direct answers. She didn't make excuses for what she'd said and thought, which I respected. She said she'd grown up in a world where the value of people was communicated through visible markers, and she'd absorbed that without questioning it the way you absorb things you're not taught to question. I don't know if that explains anything, and it doesn't erase anything, but I'm 63 and I've met enough people to know that some of them can actually look at something true about themselves and decide to change it. What I did with my estate planning, I updated everything properly, with my attorney's help, and told my son directly what existed and what the structure was. No more mystery. No more letting people fill in blanks with assumptions. That was my failure too, however unintentional. Keeping things vague because I didn't want to deal with the conversation had left a door open for exactly the kind of thinking I resented. I also donated $250,000 to the Southern Arizona Community Foundation's Elder Care Access Fund. I don't mention this for credit. I mention it because the way my daughter-in-law talked about me, about where I should live, what I could handle, what category of person I was, that's not just one person's bad thinking. That's a system that underfunds dignity for older adults and treats aging as a problem to be managed quietly. The money went somewhere it could push back against that. My son and his wife are still together. I don't know what their private conversations have been. I know he seems like himself when I see him. The same person he's always been, just a little more careful about things, which is not the worst outcome. She is different with me now. Whether that lasts, whether it's real or performed, I'll only know over time. I still drive the Buick. I had it detailed recently, which felt like a reasonable concession to age. She asked me once, at a dinner in Scottsdale about 4 months after the wedding, why I'd never just told people about the money, why I'd let the assumption run so long. I thought about it for a moment, then I told her the truth, which is that I spent 27 years working in school buildings, and the happiest people I knew had nothing to do with what they owned. My father had money, and he was lonely, and strangers came to his funeral. My wife had almost nothing, and when she died, half the neighborhood showed up at the church. I didn't want the money to be the thing. I still don't. She was quiet after that. My son put his hand on the table, just briefly. Not a gesture, just a hand resting there. That's the whole story, not a perfect ending, not a clean one. Just an honest one, which is the only kind that actually holds. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the rehearsal dinner, not the wedding toast. It's a smaller moment, sitting in my car in my son's driveway in Scottsdale, grocery bag on the passenger seat, having just heard my future daughter-in-law describe me as a logistical problem to be solved before I became too expensive to ignore. I sat there for 5 minutes and didn't feel angry. I felt something quieter than that. I felt like I finally had a clear picture of something I'd been trying to see in bad light for months. That's what I think about when people ask me if I regret how I handled it. I don't regret the patience. The patience was the whole thing. What my daughter-in-law did wasn't some rare kind of cruelty. It's a common one. She looked at me, the Buick, the hearing aids, the apartment in Tucson, and she made a decision about my value before she ever asked me a question. Most people who do that aren't even aware they're doing it. It's not calculated. It's just the water they swim in, the way they were taught to read the room, to figure out who matters and how much. The tragedy isn't that she was a bad person. The tragedy is that she'd never been asked to look at that instinct directly and decide if she actually believed in it. I spent 27 years working in school buildings. I watched a lot of kids learn things, and the ones who turned out well, not successful, I mean well, were the ones who could sit with a hard truth about themselves and not immediately run from it. That's not easy. It might be the hardest thing a person can do. My daughter-in-law, to her credit, did that. It took a wedding and a terrace conversation and a lot of time afterward, but she did it. I respect that more than I would have respected a person who never needed to. My son made a different kind of choice that night, and that one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. He stood up in a room full of her family, her friends, her parents who'd barely acknowledged my existence all weekend, and he said something true about me out loud. He didn't do it to win anything. He didn't know about the money when he did it. He did it because it was right, and he was tired of the alternative. That takes something. Not just love, which is easy when everything is easy, but the willingness to do the right thing when it costs you something. That's the thing I tried to raise in him, and seeing it come back to me like that in a hotel ballroom in Sedona was more than I knew how to respond to in the moment. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently. I could have been upfront about the inheritance years earlier. That's fair. Silence, even unintentional silence, creates space for other people's assumptions to move in and settle. What I held back quietly, she filled in loudly. There's a lesson in that for me too. That honesty isn't just about the big moments, it's about not leaving the small ones empty long enough for the wrong things to grow there. The $250,000 I donated felt right not as punishment and not as performance. It felt like directing something real toward something real. Because the attitude my daughter-in-law had about me, that aging is a problem, that dependence is embarrassing, that people stop mattering when they stop producing, that's not just one person's failing. It's in the systems, the language, the way we quietly sort each other. If I had money that could push back against any piece of that, then sitting on it would have been its own kind of answer. I'm 63. I drive the same Buick. I still don't talk about the money much unless there's a reason to. But I ask more questions now, and I leave less silence for the wrong things to fill.